to the Center for Women in Leadership NASP podcast. We are so excited to be here today. My name is Jessica Gomez, and I am one of the co-fellows for the center. And with us today is my other co-fellow, Dr. Andrea Thompson. Dr. Thompson, why don't you go ahead and take it from here and introduce our special guest today?
Oh, most certainly. So, of course, everyone knows that this year we're focusing on, that's the Center for Women in Leadership. We're focusing on how she leads. And within that book, because we're doing a regular book study, we're talking about that long and winding road to leadership, the fact that the journey does not have to be linear, and that it takes having a vision, seeking opportunities, grasping opportunities, and preparing to take those opportunities. Who best could we talk to about this but Dr. Jackie Wilson? So we have with us today Dr. Jackie Wilson, known as the Executive Director of the National Policy Board for Educational Administration, that's NPBEA. But this remarkable woman in leadership is also a wife, mother, grandmother, and friend to so many women in leadership. And all this is in addition to contributing so much to education on a national level, as well as in her state of Delaware. So, Jackie, welcome. Now, Jackie, as a woman in leadership, how do you balance all these roles and remain so positive and motivated?
Well, thank you, Andrea and Jessica, for having me here today. That's a great question, Andrea. All are important to me, and balancing these roles and the responsibilities of each have been really a constant challenge for me as a woman who's tried to navigate this long and winding road of school leadership throughout my career. I've always been ambitious and very goal-focused, and I need challenges that I like to call opportunities to keep me motivated and excited about my work. I kind of like to think of myself as creative and entrepreneurial, but I hope the word collaborator is used to describe the way I work to get things done. But with that being said, often as a woman, our ambition and conflict for us in the workplace because of our other responsibilities, particularly those in our personal life, like being a wife, being a mother, a daughter, a friend. And this conflict often creates this tension that we can very easily use as an excuse for not going after the things we want, for asking that promotion that might require us to move or to work longer hours or to travel and have time away from our family. So I've always tried to consider the implications of my professional decisions regarding my personal life. And I have found that by sharing my goals and passions with my family and friends, that they've actually been great thought partners and cheerleaders who have encouraged my ambition.
Wow, Jackie, it's like you are speaking right to me. Because, I am in mid-career right now. I've been a principal for 13 years, and it's at a point where I'm in a point in my life where I'm trying to see what's next, right? What's next for me? And I have found myself right where you're talking about that tension between what weighs heavier, right? What's more important? And I don't know that it's necessarily more important. It's just that there's this tension that you have to navigate through. And I love that idea that you shared about sharing your passions with your family and friends, because they truly are really great thought partners in helping you see things that you don't see yourself. Right. And helping you believe in yourself in ways that maybe you didn't believe in yourself. So I really, that you hit it right on for me. And I think for many of our women who are listening this morning. So Jackie, with that said, what is that passion then that drives your work? You mentioned all this tension that comes with deciding what to do next, but what is that passion that drives you to continue to excel in so many areas of your life?
Well, I think if you're passionate about things, it's really never like work. It's just, oh my goodness, these are the things I love spending my time on. So, but the passion that, I've been in public education for 50 years. And I began my career in K-12 schools while I was still in college pursuing my bachelor's degree in elementary education at Salisbury University, which was a teacher's college in Maryland. So I was married, I had a small child, and I returned to work and school. And I began my career with this love of education because my father had been a superintendent and a principal, and I had this love of schools. I was always in schools with my father. So I started my career in education as a part-time secretary in the front office, and the rest of the day as a Title I paraprofessional. And at that time, I didn't realize how fortunate I was to work in classrooms where I was observing and practicing all the strategies that I was actually learning in my coursework in my bachelor's program. So I was able to ask the teachers questions, try out ideas, how to understand some of the teaching and learning that I was getting in my courses. So as I worked as a paraprofessional full-time over 4 years while completing my teaching degree, I really was getting what now we call those practicum experiences that student teachers get now. It's in their program. At that time, it was not. So as soon as I finished my teaching degree, I was really driven and excited because I wanted to be like the teachers whose classrooms I'd been in. So I was hired as a third grade teacher in a wonderful elementary school about 10 miles away from where I was working as a paraprofessional. And I was like full of this energy and excitement, ready to then pursue my passion of working with children and working in schools with other teachers.
My goodness, Jackie, that is so timely, because when I think about what we're doing to recruit teachers and grow your own, just to hear you say you started out in the front office as a part-time secretary, to hear you talk about moving from that to being a paraprofessional, and also even doing that while you're in college, that is just phenomenal. And I'm really hoping that our listeners use this part to help in their recruitment. So, for the benefit of all the paraprofessionals out there and those who are entering the field of education, take us through that journey of starting out as a paraprofessional to classroom teacher and on to leadership.
Well, it was the first job that I had as a teacher where I really started to pay attention to the role of the principal. And for new teachers, I cannot say this loudly and clearly enough. The principal matters so much as a novice teacher. So I was fortunate to work with this wonderful principal, Mr. Ed Burton. I was hired the week before school opened. It was adding a new teaching unit to the school. There wasn't even a classroom for me. I was in a portable classroom, but Mr. Burton, that principal, made sure that the reading specialist in that school, who was really like a curriculum coordinator, was meeting with me daily to get the materials I needed, the books I needed, the furniture and supplies to answer every question that I had. And then he would meet with me to go over my classroom roster, my schedule, and to continue to support me throughout the year. And what I observed as a brand new teacher, now remember, I had been a para, so I'd been in schools. I was kind of used to that. But I noticed that he was engaged. He was knowledgeable. He cared. He was supportive. And he was exactly what I needed at that time, because I had transferred from one school to another, and schools are different. So that was exactly what I needed for my first year teaching. And I would have stayed in that school, but it was reduction in force during that time. So I was transferred to another school the next year. But I knew that Mr. Burton and I would find ourselves working together years later. And we did. Our paths did cross, and you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. So I continued my teaching career, now back at Lord Baltimore Elementary School, where I had been a paraprofessional, and I taught 5th grade and then was moved into 1st grade. And 1st grade became my passion, and I remained in that role for many years. And because of my passion for teaching children to read, of course, that motivated me to go back to school to pursue a master's in reading and earn a certification as a reading specialist. And the following year, I got hired as a reading specialist for the school. And in that role, I began to take on a lot of administrative responsibilities in collaboration with the principal because we didn't have an assistant principal. So the role was like a curriculum coordinator of the school. And I made sure all the teachers had their books and their resources they needed. But I spent a lot of time assessing new students and students who were struggling in the classroom. And I found that I had to provide professional development to teachers who lacked the knowledge of reading diagnosis or remediation. And I found myself counseling parents when they were told their children would need special education services. And many times I supported the principal in how to be the instructional leader he needed to be to the staff. So this was just like almost like a laboratory of learning for me as a new teacher.
Now, as you talk about that, I was reflecting a little bit on my role as the principal and the importance of supporting our new teachers, because we all know that, the principal can make or break it for a teacher wanting to stay in the job, especially as a new teacher. And the kinds of things that we're dealing with now in education post-COVID, and just the amount of initiatives that are put on our plates from year to year, this is more important than ever. But I mean, it's always important, but now I really feel like there's so many levels that a principal needs to be able to support their new teachers if they're going to make it, because there's a lot coming at them. And in your role, it sounds like you spent a considerable amount of time building not only the capacity of others, but your own capacity to be able then to build the capacity of others and really be excelling and functioning in the teacher leadership role. So what about those experiences drove you to reach higher? Now, I know that your principal, Mr. Burton, was definitely a big influence. But in addition to that, what were those things that experiences that drove you to continue reaching higher and higher?
I tell educators today that sometimes we wonder why we end up in jobs that we end up in. And I always say they're just preparation, things to prepare you for the next role that you'll take on. And I really do believe that. So it was these daily experiences that ignited my need to learn more. So of course I returned to school, as so many educators do. We're learners. So I needed to learn more about special education. So I took courses that I hadn't received in my master's program to learn more about working with children with severe learning disabilities and emotional issues. And then I took some counseling courses so I could better support children and their families who had problems that interfered with the student learning. And then I would want to go to conferences, but I was always teaching or working as a reading specialist in classrooms. So I started using any personal days I was allowed to go to professional conferences to learn as much as I could about literacy. Because I realized that in an elementary school, we spend so much of our day in activities and in teaching around literacy. So for the 18 years that I spent in schools as a paraprofessional and a teacher and a reading specialist, all of that was my strong foundation for my next move. And so during that time, right at that last few years of working as a reading specialist, we lost Title I funding for our students because of changing demographics in our school. Now, that doesn't mean you lose the students who need those services. They were still there. It's all based on, as we know, free and reduced lunch count. So I found myself going to the principal and saying, how do we serve our students with less resources and less support? So I began reading everything I could on parent volunteer programs. And I searched the library. I called colleagues who had parent volunteer programs in their school. And doing my research and with the support of the principal, I discerned a parent program. And the program included parents and grandparents who could support teachers in the classroom with academic responsibilities, but also support the office staff and the PTA. And the program became such a huge success. We had over 125 part-time volunteers, business partnerships, and parent programs and services. So I began to realize that as educators, it's more than just the instructional piece. There's all this community piece that's so important to our work.
So glad you mentioned that, Jackie, because especially in an era where we're focusing on teacher leaders, because what you're saying speaks to how teacher leaders can impact family engagement. And it also shows that you were functioning within the then ISLIC standards, which became the PSEL standards, even as a teacher leader. So based on those experiences, it sounds to me that you are already doing a major leadership role, even before PCL and ISLIC were coded. So here you are immersed in family engagement, working with internal and external stakeholders. Let's focus on what it meant for you to be able to impact families and how that impacted your journey to school leadership.
Well, I'm so familiar with those PCL standards and of course, with the ESLEC standards that preceded them. And I always say those standards balance on two columns, one of which is the academic press, those academic areas, but also the other column, which is so important, is the care of our children, our teachers, our families, our community. And so I learned through my work how important it was to engage families and communities to build the culture we need so that we can have a supportive environment in our school for teaching and learning. So this became my catalyst to go back to school again with the encouragement of my principal at that time, John Young, and get my certification to be an assistant principal. Remember, sometimes we know we need to do these things, and sometimes we get a little tapped. And my principal was tapping me. So I was already doing much of the work of an assistant principal, so I might as well consider a more formal role. So I went back to Salisbury University and applied and got my certification. Then I applied for my first assistant principal position. So Lord Baltimore was going to have a new unit for that position. And I just felt sure I could continue to do my work in that school with my principal. But to my disappointment, another assistant principal in the district asked to transfer to Lord Baltimore. So I was assigned to take the job of an elementary school principal in the job where that assistant principal was leaving. And it was a school 25 miles away in our district. I wasn't familiar with that community, but wow. And I really mean wow. Although I was disappointed, it was the best thing that could have happened to me at this time. I was moving from an elementary school of 500 students to one with 1,200 students and 2 assistant principals and a principal. So I had an administrative team, and the school was much more diverse with a large English second language population. It was a school where I had to provide to myself and to others those skills and knowledge to be an instructional leader and a manager. So I didn't know the community, didn't know the teachers and the schools and the family. This was a time in my career that I began to realize that I had to learn again. And I had to go back to school. But I also had to learn from the staff, the parents, and the community. So not only did I go back to school, but I began riding school buses and talking. I'd sit behind the bus driver and talk to the bus driver about these communities where there are bus rides, and believe me, bus drivers know everything. And then I would meet with teachers in small groups, like grade level groups, like go have coffee with them in the morning and just have informal meetings with teachers. I met with the parent groups and focus groups. I met with the cafeteria staff. I would bring in donuts. I knew I had to learn my community. I needed, as my staff always says, oh, Jackie's doing her history lesson. She's getting the history. So I did all this, but I also realized I needed to go back to school and pursue my doctorate. Okay. Because I knew I had so much more to learn, to grow.
Wow, Jackie, just up to this point in your career, I'm thinking, gosh, I need to be a principal still longer than what I've been doing for 13 years. There's so much more that I have left to do, and to be able to learn from you and just the outlook that you had and that you're always a learner, right? And again, I think that this podcast is speaking to me personally because I'm in that transition of within the next year or so, starting my doctorate. And I've put in, we talked about those tensions earlier about when is the right time and is this for me? And to hear your story and say, wait a minute, if Jackie can do it, I can do it. And so thank you for that. And it's so impressive that you were able to do all of these things, meet with teachers, ride the buses, be doing your history lesson learning, right? And engaging families and still enroll in a doctorate program, which in and of itself is a monumental task. So talk to us about that and where that move took you on and your journey of your educational journey and specifically in leadership.
Yeah. So I spent 6 years at this school, Georgetown Elementary School, as the assistant principal. And I was getting my doctorate, still trying to manage my personal life. But I was learning, and if we're learners, and most of us are learners, I was learning a lot from the principal, who was a very different style leader than me. This principal was really a very strong manager of a very challenging school, but he knew his community. And the assistant principal was just really very strong in working with the community and with the students. But I brought something they needed, and that was my instructional expertise. So I continued to pursue my passion at this time. And I recognized an area that which I was working on my doctorate on issues around early childhood, which had always been a passion. But I found this perfect place, this school, where I could focus my doctoral studies on how childcare settings impacted children's readiness for school. I was in a community with more diversity, greater need for services for students who came to school not ready to learn. So it was a great place for me to continue to learn and grow and get engaged in things like the Head Start programs and the community and faith-based groups that were providing so many before and after school programs and care. So I did graduate with my ADD while working at Georgetown. I had been there for 6 years, and I felt that urge, Jessica, the one that you're feeling about maybe it's time for a change. So I thought, I'm ready to be a principal. But an assistant principal position came up at the school that I had left, where I had always wanted to be the principal. And I thought, well, I have to be patient, and I can go back, because Mr. Burton, who had been my first principal, had been assigned to that school as the principal, because it was a time in the district where there was a lot of unrest with the superintendent, and they were punishing the superintendent by dismantling his executive team and moving them back into schools. Those things happened. That was another learning for me, but I knew I could go back and learn from Mr. Burton. So I applied for the job, and I went back and worked under Mr. Burton for a year and learned so much from this very experienced leader. But he decided to retire. And so I was moved into the position. I moved into that position of principal. So, but I knew that I was returning to a community that I knew. It was where I lived. And that whole year working with Mr. Burton, we co-led the school. He would say, come on, Jackie, come down to my office. I want to show you something. Come on down to my office, Jackie. I want you to watch when I do this. And I knew what he was doing. He was preparing me to become the principal. He knew he wasn't going to be staying. So it was a marvelous year for me. But knowing the community is one thing, but to returning to a school where you have worked with teachers who have been your colleagues and friends, and now you are going to be their supervisor, was a little bit more challenging than I had anticipated. So after Mr. Burton retired, after 1 year, I applied for the job. I got the job, and I was asked by the superintendent to lead the change that this school needed. But the question I had to ask myself is, I'm ready to lead, but is this staff ready for me to lead? Because after reviewing the data of this school, I knew I had some real challenges. And in my very first year, the newspaper reported that the test scores for the school, Lord Baltimore, was in the bottom 5 in test scores. I knew that my tenure as principal was not going to be easy.
Most certainly, because now you have to uphold these teachers who are feeling so dejected. So it really pulled on that leadership. So I can relate to how daunting that experience is, because I've walked that journey, and how as a leader, You have to intensify your focus, shift the focus, maintain staff morale, so much. So how did your staff and you handle that experience?
You know, Andrea, this is when I was so glad I had so much experience as a classroom teacher, that I had been a literacy specialist, that I had been a teacher leader, because this was going to be a big job. And I needed to have the experience to lead this kind of change, because the teachers cried. They were embarrassed. The superintendent was meeting with me regularly, concerned about those test scores. And I'm a brand new principal. So I decided to approach this as I do most things. Let's collaborate, let's investigate, and let's learn together how to improve the school. So I took teachers to conferences on school improvement and on school reform models. I wrote grants so we could have funds to explore models and frameworks to consider. We took trips to other schools and took detailed notes. What are they doing that we're not doing? What are we doing that they're not doing? What do we need to let go of? What do we need to add? We met, I conducted surveys. I talked to teachers. I talked to parents. I met with students every week at lunch for lunch talks to hear from children. They can tell you so much about the school. We analyzed our data. We participated in professional learning after school and in the evenings, with dinner provided by local restaurants who had kids in our school because they knew what we were doing. They had read the surveys. But in 5 years, I didn't call it turnaround. I didn't call it school improvement. I called it redesign. We're going to redesign our school on behalf of our children. And we improved programs for all students. We serve students with disabilities better. And we receive recognition as a U.S. Department of Education National Blue Ribbon School of Excellence. So the staff saw that their hard work, their effort, the community celebrated. Let me tell you, realtors were sending bouquets of flowers. You know, it was clear that all this hard work was being rewarded, and even the teachers who had not been as supportive of some of these initiatives, they made decisions about whether they wanted to stay or whether they wanted to go. And so it was an exciting time for us, but we embraced this change and celebrated this. And we knew now our job was to maintain that success.
Wow, Jackie, that is an incredible story that you share, and I'm sure that it was not an easy task. I mean, 5 years, right? You don't just redesign a school from one year to the next. It takes time, and along the way, there's those challenges that not everybody has the same mindset as you do, or is willing to work as hard as you're willing to push. So, from a school perspective, you're going to find that, and you find that no matter what level you go to. But now that you've shared your story with us all your experience leading up to the principalship, and as we talked about next steps, let's shift our focus to the work at the national level. How did that come about from leaving Lord Baltimore? And then how did you get so involved in the national work?
My success at Lord Baltimore provided me opportunities, because the superintendent would ask me to be on special assignments. So I would lead district committees on shared decision-making. That's what they called it at that time. Running district summer school programs, get asked to serve on state committees. And I was very involved on committees with our Department of Education in Dover, and with our Delaware School Administrators Association, which is actually an affiliate for NAESP. So I served on the Professional Standards Board, which was very engaged in making regulations around and policy. And I began to realize, oh my goodness, if you want things to stick, you need to get involved with policy, because that's how you sustain the work. So that also resulted in me being selected the next year as Delaware's NAESP, the Elementary Principals Association's National Principal of the Year, which was probably one of the most exciting awards I ever received, to represent the elementary principals for our state, but then to be in DC with outstanding principals across the country. So that network for me was getting bigger. I was meeting people and I was learning from people, and that thirst for knowledge learning that a principal in California or a principal in Montana or a principal, in Boston, in Massachusetts, I could learn from these individuals. So I was celebrating all this wonderful thing and remembering, and this is so important for principals, that when you do well, it's not you doing well by yourself. You have to acknowledge the team that helped you accomplish that. So celebrating with my staff, with my community, with my students was important. But with this recognition of our work, I was recruited to go work with the Secretary of Education. Our school had been doing great work. Moving a school from the bottom 5 to the number 1 draws a lot of attention to your work. So I joined the Delaware Department of Education as the Director of Professional Accountability. And this is where the secretary said to me, I need someone who really knows schools, Jackie. You know schools. And she asked me to be responsible for licensure and certification of educators, professional development, the assessments like praxis that were going to measure the competence of our leaders and our teachers, how we were giving feedback, performance evaluation, and to look at school leadership. The state was really beginning to look at school leadership and those barriers to having great principals in every school. So it was an opportunity for me to learn more about state and national policy and to work with districts, charter schools, and our higher education partners.
I tell you, Jackie, I'm so glad you are talking about that shift from building leadership to, say, district leadership on up to state leadership, because we talk about that in the book She Leads and in our book talks that the center does. So a lot of women are going along that journey, but they need to know how to navigate that journey. So share that with us. How did you navigate the journey? You got there.
Our first inclination is to go in and change things. And I have learned that is the greatest way to lose talent, and that the policies and practices are in place for a reason. So I had to listen and learn from the people who were already in that job. Here I was coming out of a district in a school, and I'm now at the Department of Education with people who had been there long before I arrived. And they were wondering, okay, what is she going to be coming here and changing? That's the first thing. So I said to them, we're going to have history lessons. So every Friday I would get coverage so that every single secretary, administrative assistant, ed associate could be in a room together, and we would take on 1 or 2 topics and talk about why we do it this way. Is this the right way to do it? And if you could change things, what would we change? And we did that. And so I spent that whole first year just learning. Again, I can't say enough about, don't go in and try to change things right away. You have to listen and you have to learn. So I also learned that I had to work within a political system, because in Delaware, our Secretary of Education is appointed by the governor. So that makes things differently. So I, in turn, was also working for the governor. And so I had to learn how to work with legislators, the press, the business directors in the state, the HR, human resource directors in the state. So I had to look at what kind of data had been collected. There was a wonderful report that had been done the year before I arrived that had dust on it. No one had really done anything with it. So I read that. I took all the reports home and I read them and said, oh my goodness, there's lots of recommendations in here. And this one report was a time when there was an opportunity to apply for Wallace Foundation dollars, who were focusing on state policy that would change standards, training programs, and working conditions for school leaders. So for the next 10 years, on behalf of the Department of Education, I would focus on, with my other responsibilities, on how I could begin to give principals what I always needed and wanted, and so we focused on succession planning, principal pipelines, distributed leadership, teacher pathways, licensure and certification, standards alignment, and how to make our preparation programs stronger and have more quality. So it was such an exciting time to be at the department. and have this funding from the Wallace Foundation to invest in our ideas. And at that time, that hard work really paid off because sometimes districts see the department as regulatory and not a place of innovation, and it should be a place where innovation happens. And I believe that's one of the things I was able to accomplish and was awarded the Second Mile Award and the Secretary of Education's Award of Excellence. But I think the greatest accomplishment for me in navigating all that was when I was asked on my last day at the department to come over to Legislative Hall, and the head of the education committees for both the House and the Senate presented me with a proclamation for being able to work together with legislators, with the department, with districts, with our ed to get stuff done. And I think, how do we get things done? It is really through collaboration and partnerships. So it was during this time that I tried to retire. Let's say I failed retirement. And I went to work for a small private university, Wilmington University, and I just was going to teach. I'm a teacher. Remember, I'm a teacher, and I was just going to teach, I thought.
Well, with all of your experience, I don't think you're just going to teach. Right? That's impossible to just go and teach. And congratulations on all those recognitions. I'm certain that you made such a huge impact. And just listening here to your story continues to inspire me to keep pushing and keep learning. And so with your retirement from the K-12 landscape, you shifted to higher ed because you thought you were just going to teach. How did you manage to still keep the national presence, even though you had stepped away from the national platform per se?
Well, one of the things I have learned is sometimes for departments of education, and particularly because many times they're so political, that they can get more work done outside of the department. That's why you'll find the department reach out with partners. So the Secretary of Education had asked me to continue to manage the Wallace Grant while I was at Wilmington University. And the university allowed me to do that. So I stayed at Wilmington for about 2 years, teaching classes and managing this Wallace Grant, which was doing a lot of work for the secretary, testing ideas with school districts, on trying things, trying innovations. And then I got recruited to join the University of Delaware as both a faculty member, an assistant professor, and teach classes in their master's and doctorate, but also be an associate director at the Delaware Academy for School Leadership. Now, we call it DAZZLE, but that is a center that does professional development with school leaders, but also policy recommendations and research. So, and it was a perfect time because the director at that time had been a former superintendent, and he really knew our large county of Newcastle County. He knew all the superintendents, all the principals. He did not know the middle of the state and the southern part of the state, which I knew well. So we were a really great team in saying that the center needs to service the whole state, not just one county, and to be able to provide opportunities. And we had funding from the Wallace Foundation to continue that work because the Wallace funds followed me because we were still doing this great work. So we continued to do this work, and over the years, tested a lot of ideas in school districts across the state. So the first 5 years, we had the Wallace funding to support ideas, and we had a small funding line for the state. But over the years, as that state funding line decreased, and the DAZZLE gets a small amount of money from the state, and our grant cycle was ending with Wallace, I found myself now, the director was retiring, I was being asked to be the new director, and I had no funding. And I'd been giving away professional development and coaching services for free. So I read this great book called Free, which talks about that sometimes we give things away for free, like a cell phone, but then people pay for the service. And I thought, we're doing great work. And if the work we're doing is really this important, then our partners will pay for it as long as we provide them high quality and at a fair and affordable price. So I redesigned the way we did business at Dazzle, and we shifted to a fee-for-service model. And we began applying for RFPs with the state of Delaware. This was during Race to the Top. RFPs, and we started contacting our district partners and looking at work outside of Delaware. So we began, and I had this wonderful network of districts that I had worked with through the Wallace Network, who knew my work, knew my reputation. And so during that time, we really expanded our work outside of the state. And I began to do some work with our partners, with some partners who I had built some relationships with. So I began to do some consulting work with NAESP and some with the American Association for School Administrators. That's the superintendent's organization, the Council for Chief State School Officers. And then I took on the role of executive director of the National Policy Board, because during that time at the university, I had been asked to co-chair the committee that actually designed and developed the PSAL standards and the NELP standards, which are the National School Leader Standards. So all of this was like the perfect time where all of these things were kind of intersecting. And it was an opportunity for me to continue to do my work at the academy, but also begin to step outside of our state and have a much bigger reach across the country.
Wow, Jackie, you see why I have stalked you for years? Because as a woman who was stepping into leadership, I needed a role model, and I needed someone who could do this with grace and humility, which is what I saw in you over the years as I would work and see you in the same space with me. And I say, that's why I want to be a mentor. Didn't even know you were mentoring me. See, mentees can select their mentors too.
Yes, they can.
And I like, that's what I want to be with. So here's the thing, Jackie. So it sounds as though you've had a wonderful career, and you have, even though you keep saying you're retired, which is so funny to me. But it's filled with opportunities. You've talked about how to grasp opportunities, look for opportunities, and most of all, to prepare for them. Because so many times you've gone back to learn, which is what we're talking about with women in our center. So, Jackie, in summary, what would you say to women in leadership about at least 5 of your big takeaways?
Andrea, I have had a marvelous career, and I've been very fortunate. But I think we have to be fearless as women, particularly. So, if I were to give women out there some advice or guidance of things that have really been important, don't ever forget the power of partnerships and collaboration. You can't do it all by yourself. So get buy-in to sustain your work, build trusting relationships. It is essential. You can't roll that big ball up the hill by yourself. So have a team and do that. The other is be creative. Don't look at things and say, oh, I can't do that. There's a barrier. See those barriers as opportunities. Be entrepreneurial. Don't let what's been done in the past, like the lack of resources or lack of buy-in, prevent you from seeing possibilities of improving things, including yourself, and find ways around them and turn those obstacles into opportunities. The other thing is, I think we all have a responsibility, and I know for women sometimes this is hard. We have to grow other leaders. Create a team of talented, potential people around you and give them opportunities to grow and mentor them, and find yourself a mentor and a coach who's going to push you to try things, to have the confidence you need to help you become a problem solver. The other thing I say is work hard. I know sometimes as women, we have to work a little harder. So, and not make excuses. I hear many women say, well, I didn't get the job because I didn't have enough experience in finance. And they always see women as curriculum people. Well, if you know that, go partner with the finance director and say, I need you to teach me everything you know. Or if you don't know, if you don't know how school boards operate, then start attending school board meetings and learn how that governance works. But work hard. And don't be afraid to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and people who don't agree with you, because it's some of those people who pushed me to be better. And I would say the advice my father always gave to me, and I have never forgotten, and I was very young, he said to me, you don't go get the knowledge you need when the job comes. You better already have that. So get that certification, get that skill set, so that when that job you've always dreamed of comes before you, you've already got all the certifications, the knowledge, those internship experiences that you're going to need to sit in that interview and advocate why you're the best person for that job. So that would be my advice, is be ready when those opportunities come.
And we couldn't have summed it up any better, Dr. Wilson. Really, what an incredible journey you've led, and what a true honor it's been to be able to have you on our podcast today. For me personally, this has been very encouraging to me, and I know that it's been to so many, to know that the road to leadership isn't always as straight as we'd hoped for or that we thought it would be. And your 45 years of experience in education starting as a secretary, paraprofessional, teacher, reading specialist, assistant principal, director of professional accountability, serving as a faculty member at the University of Delaware. That gives us so much to learn from. And then now, so you're currently the executive director of the National Policy Board for Educational Leadership. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yes, right. And just to think about the huge role you have in supporting the advancement of school and school system leadership at the national level. I'm in California. You're on the other side of the country, and yet I can reap the benefits of the hard work that you're doing at the national level. And thank you for that. And one of the things you mentioned it earlier, but we're super excited to know that you're currently under contract, right, with Corwin for a book. And you mentioned Gary Bloom, your writing partner, earlier, around the idea of blended coaching, right? So you talked about, can you be, and we were having a conversation earlier about, can you be a supervisor and a coach at the same time, right? What those skills and strategies to support that development is so key. So I know the book is scheduled to be out in August of this year, 2023. And I know I speak for Andrea. We cannot wait to get our copy.
I don't know.
We cannot wait. And really, Dr. Jackie Wilson, it has been a true pleasure to learn from you, and your words of wisdom and your story will continue to impact many women in leadership. So thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Sure, Jessica. Thank you and Andrea for giving me this opportunity to just kind of tell you the long and winding road it's been. And I guess there's still a little bit of work that's still left to be done.
There's always work to be done.
Always work to be done on behalf of women in this country. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You're a role model. Thanks.